Joel Miller is a man who's lost it all. A broken man with few moral lines left to cross. A man with few reasons left to live for. A ruthless and violent man that won't let anything stand in his way. Throughout the story of The Last of Us, he does some terrible things, and we get hints of even worse actions from his past. But does that make him evil? Hey stragglers and tourists, my name is TheiPadCat, and in today's video we're going over probably one of the most discussed topics of The Last of Us Part 1. Is our guy Joel evil? Now, I know it's popular to debate over whether or not his actions at the hospital were evil specifically, but I want to take a look at the character as a whole. Now, as this is a topic that people are bound to have a wide range of different opinions on, I'd like you to remember that this is all interpretation. My interpretation. There is no objective right or wrong or truth in this discussion. Only opinions. Anyways, without dragging this intro out any longer,
let's get on with it.
Now, I want to start with talking a bit about evil itself. Some people argue that it does not exist, that it's a make-believe concept we use to brand people who do bad things, and people we see as enemies. Personally, I think that there is something to that argument, but I don't agree with it wholeheartedly. I think evil exists, but not necessarily that all atrocious or bad things people do are out of evil. So for this discussion, I am going to assume that evil as a concept does exist, because otherwise, well, it'd be a little hard to discuss whether or not Joel is evil. Furthermore, what is an evil action, and what makes it evil? There is no real answer to that, of course, but I look at it like this, personally. There are bad actions, but all bad actions don't necessarily have to be evil, as I said previously. Then there are evil actions. All evil actions are bad actions, but all bad actions aren't evil. What I separate them by is the intent behind it and the possible consequences of the action. I'm a bit of a utilitarian, which, if you don't know what it is or what it means, is the theory that whichever action leads to the best outcome for as many people as possible is the ethical action to take. The action could still be atrocious and horrible and thus bad, but not evil, considering the outcome. When it comes to intent, if a person intends to do harm, to hurt, or gain pleasure from doing the bad action, it's evil. But if, for example, a person is defending themselves from an assailant and end up hurting or killing them, it's still a bad action, but not an evil one. I hope that sort of makes it clear how I look at things, so you can understand my reasoning. Now, let's talk a bit about Joel, shall we? We first meet him in 2013. He lives as a single father with his daughter, as some sort of carpenter or engineer. But his life changes forever over the span of a couple of hours when the CBI reaches critical mass, and him and his daughter are mistaken for infected individuals by a soldier, which sadly leads to her death. Years pass, and to cope with the sorrow, Joel desensitizes himself from practically everything in the world. He becomes nothing but a shell of his former self. This leads to him committing some horrible things, like joining up with a hunter gang and preying on ordinary survivors, and splitting up with and ridiculing his brother over his more hopeful view of the world. Eventually, he ends up in the Boston quarantine zone, where he meets up with the equally cold and ruthless Tess. Together they run a smuggling operation. The only thing they care about is their money, and anything or anyone in the way of that won't live to tell the tale, as we saw with Robert. But that ends up changing drastically when they get the mission from the Fireflies to smuggle Ellie out of the zone. Joel doesn't want to remember Sarah, so he treats Ellie very harshly and leaves most of the interaction to Tess. But when Tess, in an unfortunate turn of events, dies, it all falls to Joel. On their journey throughout the country, Joel kills his way forward, despite him changing and becoming warmer toward Ellie, he's still the same ruthless man and continues killing and even resorts to torture at one point. But instead of doing it for the memory of Tess or the mission, he does it for Ellie. When the pair inevitably reach their destination, Joel is told that Ellie will not survive the procedure to use her to create a vaccine. Unable to live with or accept that, he kills everyone in his way of Ellie, takes her back and flees to his brother's settlement, lying to Ellie of what actually happened. I think we can all agree that Joel is no saint. Whatever you think of him, he has done some abhorrent shit. But again, is he evil? We don't know exactly how fast he becomes the ruthless, violent grunt after the prologue, but since he's very good at practically shutting off his emotions in the main game, I'd say it was pretty soon after the outbreak. Which probably means he joined up with the Hunter gang pretty early on. Now of course we don't know what he did in the gang, and what his intentions and reasons for joining up was. Maybe he was their cook, not partaking in any of the violence and just joined up for the safety of numbers. But considering the way he acts in the main story, his arguments with Tommy about the way the world works, and his smuggling operation with Tess, I'd say he was out there for years, luring innocents into what they thought was safe territory, and murdered them for resources. No matter his intentions or whatever good consequence this could have had, it's still a bad action. But I'm not sure I could call him evil for doing so. Despite how violent Joel is, we never really see him taking any pleasure in the killing, apart from maybe during the lakeside section of the game. I don't believe he's a psychopath with thirst for blood. I think just like the hunters in Pittsburgh, he convinced himself that it was all about survival of the fittest, and was something that just had to be done. The consequences might have been horrible, but since I'm almost 100% certain Joel wasn't doing his hunting for the sake of it, I can't say he was ill-intentioned. And furthermore, walking away from the gang or just doing his own thing might have just not been possible. Maybe he wasn't skilled enough to survive on his own, or maybe by leaving he might have gotten hunted down by his old friends. His hunter days were horrible, atrocious, and a bad action. But I can't say it was evil. Moving on to his smuggling with Tess, the same can sort of be said about that. I'm a bit more uncertain here though, since the pair was willing to do next to anything for their money, and certainly wasn't in it just for the survival, as could have been the case with joining the Hunters. I lean towards his bad actions as a smuggler being evil, because they were not doing it for the best possible outcome for as many people as possible. If they had been doing that, they would have set up a network to distribute their wares over the quarantine zone to people who needed them or something. They could have still made their money, but also had a greater cost on themselves. To be fair, it is possible that they could have done something like this, as we really don't find out a lot about their life in the QC. But with the way both of them act, I don't see them being very charitable. This is further supported by Tess' last-minute redemption at the Capitol when she realizes how bad she and Joel have been, and wants to make it right by making sure the vaccine gets made. I'm not saying working toward making your own life is evil. Absolutely not. I believe the right of the individual and their pursuit of happiness is extremely important. But not having a sense of there being anything else than yourself and murdering anything in the way of your self-betterment is evil. Of course, the argument could be made that Joel was not the one making the decisions and the one in charge of the operation. But even then, I'd still hold him accountable, because at any point he could have walked away if he felt what he was doing was wrong or evil. It's not like with the Hunter gang. He was living in a quarantine zone, the only remnant of civilization and safety left in the country. But he didn't. No, I think his smuggling was evil. Next up, we have most of his and Ellie's journey throughout what was left of the US. During this relatively short period in comparison to the previous two, some serious amount of killing is going on. Wherever they go, Joel kills people left, right and center. But save for the torture scene, I don't know if I would call Joel evil here. In the grounded documentary for The Last of Us, Neil Druckmann states that the violence is not supposed to be fun or glamorous. It's supposed to make you uncomfortable. Now, of course he's talking about the players outside of The Last of Us' universe. While I'm not really sure that Joel is uncomfortable with it, I again don't think he takes any pleasure in doing it. To be honest, he probably doesn't even feel anything at all, which of course is pretty sick and bad in and of itself. But not evil. Never does Joel kill people without first being provoked or attacked first by that faction, unlike when he was a smuggler. Sure, he might shoot first at the hunters, but not before he was ambushed and almost killed by their associates. It might have been a mass murder, which is atrocious and horrible, but it wasn't evil. His intent in killing them was not just to kill them for the sake of it. He was defending himself and Ellie. And in the end, it most likely led to the end of the Hunters' reign of terror and the potential saving of survivors coming to both Lakeside and Pittsburgh in the future. Bad action, but not evil. Before we move on to the big one, let's just quickly talk about the torture scene. While it's badass and a lot of people, including me, sympathize with Joel in that scenario, I still think it's evil. He had gotten the information he needed, while alluding to that both of them would be let go, but instead he brutally killed them. He did not do it out of necessity. He did it out of rage and hatred. He wanted to hurt them, unlike many of the other scenarios. The killing of these two people did most likely nothing to better the situation for anyone. This is a bad action, but also an evil one. Finally, we have the big one, the Firefly Hospital in Salt Lake City. When the pair finally arrive and are taken to the Fireflies, it turns out Ellie can't live through the procedure. So Joel, not being able to cope with losing another daughter, does what he's good at. He murders his way through the hospital, kills at least one doctor and takes Ellie to the parking garage, where he shoots and then kills Marlene. Was this evil or not? It's a hard question to answer, and it really depends on how you perceive evil. Naughty Dog intentionally made this part of the story so that it would be hard to determine who is right. Joel didn't need to kill the Fireflies. It wasn't necessary for his survival, but he did it anyways. Though I don't think he took pleasure in killing them either. But regardless of his intentions, I can see no good other than what good Ellie's survival is to Joel, coming from Joel murdering everyone and taking Ellie. But on the other hand, I don't really see the good in letting the Fireflies kill Ellie either. I mean, you would think that creating a vaccine ultimately would be a lot better for more people than Joel saving Ellie, but it's a bit more complicated than that. There is no way a vaccine is the solution to the problems of the world in The Last of Us. There are several things standing in the way of it being even slightly effective. For example, mass production, distribution, and the problem of one faction practically at war with every other faction having access to it. I'd love to go more in depth on this topic, but I already did a video on the Fireflies and their ideology and the problems with it, where I also discussed the vaccine. I strongly urge you to watch it, which you can do here. Ultimately though, I have to say that this was evil of Joel. He did not do it because he had to survive. He did it out of selfishness. And even though the vaccine might not and probably will not do a lot of good, the eradication of a large part of the Fireflies certainly will have a negative effect on the wasteland. Look, in the end, I'm not gonna sit on some high horse claiming I'm so much better. I'm doing this video from the comfort of my home, where I don't have to deal with such extreme situations. I'm not sure I would act as the good guy in any of these situations Joel found himself in. Joel is an incredibly well-written character, and despite him being ruthless and violent, he's very human. And humans are evil sometimes. I wouldn't say Joel is totally evil, but he has done and probably will do more evil things in part 2. Anyways, that's just what I think. What do you think? Do you agree? Disagree? Do you think Joel is evil? I'm sure you'll find holes in my reasoning or something I missed, which I always seem to do in these videos, tell me all of that in the comments down below. Also, did you know that there is a TheiPadCat Discord server? Well, there is. And if you want to talk to me about anything and everything, that's the place to do it. Link is in the description. And if you'd like more reliable notifications on whenever I upload or stream than what YouTube can provide you with, follow me on Twitter too. That link is also in the description. Anyways, until next time, have a great day.